is Mark Lewin. I am a historian in training. I'm studying at St. John's University in Queens. I'm currently working on my master's, and today I'm here with...
I'm Pastor Wendy Page, and I'm over at the Central Valley in Harriman United Methodist Churches. I graduated from Drew University with a master's in theology, and I graduated from Nyack College with a bachelor's degree in pastoral ministry and Bible interdisciplinary.
Today we're going to talk about President Trump. Our talks aim at history and theology and combining the two and looking at our society, the social injustices in our society, our history, social injustice and history, and just general conversations that people feel like it's hard to have. We're gonna look at these conversations, all these histories through religion and through history, theology and history together. So today we're talking about President Trump. Trump is our 45th president. He was elected back in November. Within his first few weeks, months now of office, he has seen quite the opposition. One of the largest protests from women, from Black Lives Matter movements. And the question is, why does Trump have this backlash going on? And what we're really talking about today is because this backlash is so popular among everyday people is because Trump does not represent America. That is, if we look at his election, he lost to Hillary Clinton in the popular vote by over 3 million people. The reason why he won in these electoral votes was he was able to capture the working class idea of, well, his slogan, to make America great again.
Mm-hmm. And that slogan is not something that is new. It was used before. And it was used as a tool. It wasn't talking to everyone in the nation. So it started actually with Hitler. Hitler
Yes.
made that statement, and Reagan used it also. And after Reagan did that, the war on drugs became a big topic in America. And we know what happened. Jails were filled with black men soon after that because it was a war on drugs. But it really wasn't a war on drugs. It was kind of like a war on poor black people. So as we talk about Trump talking about making America great, we ask the question, when was America great for the community of African American people in this nation? When we look back, we see a fight for just equal rights, and we see many injustices and many systematic evils, which is one of our key words.
Yes. What we're really talking about, and we are arguing, is that Trump represents a racist ideology, whether he knows it or not.
Or does it on purpose or not.
Or does it on purpose or not. He represents a racist ideology. When you look at some of his policies of immigration, of even trying to crack down on crime, you have a plethora of police shootings, of executions really, of young black men and women being killed by law enforcement, people that were sworn to protect these communities. And his response to this is that we need more police. We need to crack down more on crimes. Mm-hmm. And what's wrong about that historically, like you just said, you look at the war on drugs, prisons were filled.
That's it.
We didn't make America great with that. We threw younger generations into jail in which they could not escape. The chance of returning to a normal life, quote unquote, after going to jail in America is significantly low compared to other countries, modern countries.
And studies have shown that incarceration in America does not rehabilitate. And the money that we're spending on putting folks in jail instead of rehabilitating them is another topic. But we're not going to go there right now. We're going to stick with
President Trump.
Yes.
We're going to stick with President Trump. But we'll go to his immigration reform. One of the most racist comments he said was when he stated, "They're not sending their best." Anytime you use a generalized word to classify a group of people, that is the very beginning of racism, and that is the very beginning of genocide. Hitler did that in World War II. That happened in Rwanda with the Tutsis and the Tutsis, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? You're labeling an entire group of people as something they are not. You take one percentage of a group of people and you paint a picture of that for all of those people. Now, historically, that's wrong, and we can see that within our own history. You had the Irish that were coming in, that Anglo-Saxon WASPs said, oh, these Irish people are going to destroy our country. There was a belief with John F. Kennedy, just because he was Catholic, that he would be working with the Pope to destroy America. That was an actual idea.
Mm-hmm.
Theologically, we can look at Trump's policies of immigration, and it goes against every Christian value there is. Jesus tells us to love our neighbor. There's passages in the book of Leviticus where they say, treat a native in your country as treat an immigrant in your country as a native and as your neighbor, as one of your own.
Mm-hmm.
These are Christian ideas that are showing us not to label a group of people as criminals or rapists or drug offenders. These are ideas of saying support them, help them, love them.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I find that I speak with friends who will tell me, what's happening to America, but they still voted for Trump. They still said yes to Trump. And what I find is that when you look at Trump and you realize that he used fear in America, I find that in America, after Obama being in office for 8 years, there's this backlash of fear of other. And that whole topic of other, who's considered other? When you see me and Mark sitting here, what do you see? Do you see two peers? Do you see a woman? Do you see a man? We can't pretend like we don't have differences, and we can't pretend like we don't see them. We have to get to a point where we understand that as soon as we consider someone other, as an outside of or not a part of the community, we're already
creating this label of subhumanism.
Yeah.
That happens in America with blacks.
Yeah.
You had segregation, which was separate but equal when it really wasn't equal. But
at all.
But you had the same thing that's almost going on with Trump labeling Mexicans that are coming into, or immigrants for that matter, coming into the United States. And you have this idea back in right after the Civil War, people think, oh, well, blacks were freed. No, it was not that simple. As W.E.B. Du Bois said, they had no money, they had no land, they had no tools, and they were expected to do what? To be at the same level that their white Southern counterparts were, which a majority of were racists. And that's actually a good segue to talk about racism. So how would we define racism? Because racism back then is different from a definition of racism today.
Mm-hmm. So racism back then, if we were going to say the exact definition back then, before we wised up and realized that in America there's really not a wanting to admit that this is a problem. So racism, systematic evil. Hold on one second. So racism, let's just look at the definition of racism. Belief that race is the primary determination of human traits and capacities, that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. So we have to understand what race is. So race is a particular people. It's a particular group of people that believe in a similar way. Race is considered a kind of people. But then, if we go further, there's the word superiority.
Right.
And superiority is to say that you're superior to someone else. You
feel above them, you feel like they're beneath you, and that when you tie the two together, it's that one group thinks that they're a superior race based on their historical, cultural, ethnic background over another.
And without that, violence is impossible.
Right.
You could not hurt yourself. I guess you could hurt yourself physically, but when you see someone as yourself and you see someone as who you are, as in Ubuntu, I am because we are, when you see someone that way, it's just not possible for me to say, oh, I'm going to harm you or I'm going to take from you. As soon as you see a person or a people or a group as less than, that connector between yourself being here and that person being there, that connector makes violence possible.
Right. Because you see them as subhuman.
Exactly.
You don't see them as an equal, you see them as less.
Mm-hmm.
And that violence is justified in, they're not human, which was used among racists, which is still used among racists along the KKK today. But the racism that we're kind of seeing now has kind of transpired. It's not so much people getting lynched anymore. It's not so much people being, it's hard to say that it's not so much people getting lynched. It's hard to say it's not so much people not allowed to businesses because we see that today. But racism has evolved into something even greater and uglier. It's a systematic oppression of people of color nowadays. It's the system that we live in is designed to oppress people of color based on how much melanin they have in their skin. And
so the racism that we just described to you is it's very general. But when you get into higher education and when you get into places where people have had conversations, long, in-depth conversations about racism, you come to the understanding that prejudice and power are binary for the definition of racism.
yes.
Someone has to have power, and they also have to have prejudice. And some folks would fight back and say that that's not true. A person can be racist if they don't have power. When you're the oppressed, the one on the bottom, the one getting kicked, the power is very important. The one who holds the power, the one that the society, that the group of everyone who is considered in the inner circle and not considered other, that belief system is definitely crucial to the one who's considered outside and other. Because what happens is that the one who considers that person other, they can do violence, and they're the ones who write the history. They wrote his story.
Absolutely.
They're the ones who get to say what's in the textbooks. They're the ones who get to make the rules.
And we see this in Trump's administration because if you just take a look at his cabinet members, nearly 70% all white males.
It's insane.
And compared to Barack Obama's, it was something a little bit over 30% of white males. So that speaks volume because is that representation? No. Representation would be having the best people for the job, absolutely, but having the best people for the job at the same time representing what America is supposed to be, a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-background nation. If that's the image we try to display of ourselves, that's the image that we should represent in our government, in our cabinet. And the very fact that Trump has some of these administrations in these people in his administration reflect racism, like Betsy DeVos. How is Betsy DeVos in the Department of Education going to fix a systematic evil of oppression of blacks through, these public schools? How are her policies going to help have people of color, children of color, learn more so that they can get to college, they can get a better job, they can get economically stable?
And, we're talking about race. We're definitely talking about race in America, but that statement goes to all of the poor because the poor are the most vulnerable. And in school, what they taught us was if you were going to deal with an oppressed people who are the most vulnerable, if there's a people who's crying out, first find out what they're crying out for.
Yes.
And you don't ask the people who are not oppressed why they're crying out. You go to them and you have their voice heard and spoken out loud what the problem is. So when you have someone like, what's her name?
Betsy DeVos.
Betsy DeVos, someone like her, who has no idea. She proved it in her hearings that she has no idea what's going on in the educational world. She has no idea, okay? And that's why she almost didn't make it in. But she made it in because the powers that be continued to keep things rolling in the direction.
Mike Pence used his vote because it was split 50-50. Once again, the system, though, prevents actual representation from happening.
Exactly.
Yes.
So here she is, and she's not educated. And for me, this is a personal story, and I'm going to tell it because I really think that you need to see this from the point of view of the individual who is the most oppressed. So I grew up until I was 11 in a ghetto. And while I was growing up in the ghetto, we had an after-school program. The presidency changed. And when the presidency changed, all of the people in the offices changed and all of the policies changed. Everything changed. And the after-school program that we had was no longer. And when that happened, instead of going to the after-school program at 3 o'clock, because my mom and dad worked really hard with their 10 children living in the ghetto, trying to just make it, I was vulnerable. I got off the bus, and a young man who lived in the neighborhood who was less fortunate in his situation, there was some drug issues in his household, and there were some issues in his household, but he saw me getting off the bus, and he knew that I was alone, and he said, hey, Wendy, I'm going to race you to the store. And he told me, me being a naive, maybe 10, 12-year-old, 11-year-old girl, he told me to take the path through the woods to run to the store, and he was going to take the road. And I was like immature enough to take him up on that challenge. And I thought it was a game. So I took off running on the path that usually takes you right to the store. And it was just the area we called it the woods, but it wasn't the woods. It was a plot of land that had no work done on it yet between the ghettos that we lived in. And I took off running, and when I looked over, I see this guy coming straight at me. He had done this to get me isolated. He had told me this to get me isolated. And when he did that, he did exactly what Trump said he likes to do to females. I mean, I know that it's sad that this is what I have to say to you, but that's exactly what he did. And I was shocked, and I was sickening. And I didn't even tell my parents because the world that I live in was dangerous, and my parents told us to be careful, and they told us not to go anywhere by ourselves. Had I had any idea that that was going to happen, I wouldn't have gone down that road. But the point is that the programs that were cut because of the funds that were cut through the change of our leadership, I was made even more vulnerable. I was already vulnerable.
Right.
The question is, what happens to the most vulnerable when you see someone like, what's her name again?
Betsy DeVos.
Betsy DeVos. When you see someone like her going into office, what's going to happen to the little girl in the ghetto who needs that education, who really is relying on the system to make it?
And it's so hard to break that cycle without those after-school programs and whatnot. That public education funding, and look at Trump's budget. He wants to increase the military spending. He wants to make America great again, so to say, but we have things like happening to you. We have schools falling apart. We have infrastructure being destroyed. We have kids not being able to afford college. But it's more important that we spend more money of our tax dollars on increasing our military, which we have already over a $500 billion spent on military. We have roughly about $600 billion spent on our military. The war on Iraq alone could have paid for Bernie Sanders' proposal to make community colleges free. The war on Iraq alone, period. What are we doing with our funds? What does it say about our funds if we're not reinvesting into people that need help, people's stories who need to be told? Mm-hmm. That's not representation. That is suppression. Mm-hmm. Whether it's conscious or not, you're suppressing, Pastor Wendy's voice. You're suppressing Black people's voice of crying out to, hey, we need a better education, we need to get to a better place. But instead we have people like Betsy DeVos who says, well, let's have this privatized. Let's have people choose which schools. What if you can't afford those schools? That's why we need more government assistance to help not only public schools, but above that level into colleges.
And it's a standard. It's a standard.
Yes.
It's not a matter of saying, oh, we just want the government to fix all our problems for us. It's just a standard of living. It's basic standard
Absolutely.
living. Everybody should be able to get a good education. And I can tell you, those school districts that have had terrible funding, or the funding is just not being distributed properly, you can see it. I mean, these kids know when they feel like they're being educated in a cage. They know when they look around at their school district how much people care about them. Their sense of self is developed through their understanding of how they are educated. So if they're not educated in a way that has a standard, just a basic standard for all people,
And I did my undergrad at Mount St. Mary's College in Newburgh, New York. Newburgh has over four times more than the average of killings in New York, of homicide in New York.
That's how my neighborhood used to be. Go ahead. Sorry.
I've met people, I've talked with residents of Newburgh that have witnessed their best friends being shot. How do you take a test when your best friend just died? And how this plays into Trump is, well, you have a person like Betsy DeVos who does not care for that person, or she sees that, well, you just have to work harder. And it's not a matter of working harder, it's a matter of, we are our brother's keeper. This is where religion comes into it. And if we claim to be a Christian nation, like Trump tries to represent, then shouldn't we be helping these people whose best friends have been shot? Shouldn't we be trying to fix these crime-ridden areas? Shouldn't we be trying to allocate funds not into war, but into peace and to developing more intellect? And this is the system that is oppressing people. This is the system that is preventing them from getting a better job. Now, that person I was just talking about, he works in the Woodbury Commons. He has a kid. And while I applaud his efforts to provide for his family and to, always be there for his family, I kind of just ask myself, like, couldn't he had a better life if he lived in a different area? What's the percentage of people that live in crime-filled areas? What's the percentage of people that live in areas of high amounts of drugs and killings? How many of them go to Harvard? How many of them go to Yale? How many of them go to Princeton compared to people who have that privilege, compared to people who live in areas that are gated communities where they can have tutors help them study to get into college?
Just basic living in areas is important. I remember when I first moved to Monroe Woodbury, I remember being able to hear my thoughts. That's how I described it. Wow, I can hear my thoughts now. And it was because it was quieter, and it was because there were trees, and it was because there was nature around me. I honestly don't believe that ghettos should exist. I think that there should be a standard of living for folks also.
Absolutely.
But it's interesting, as we talk about Trump's choices, there was another choice that came up. Do you want to talk about that? You want to talk about Jeff?
Who was it?
Elizabeth Warren speaking.
Elizabeth Warren was trying to recite a letter by Martin Luther King Jr.'s wife,
Coretta Scott King.
his widow, Coretta Scott King.
Yeah.
And they silenced her. I don't know if you can get any more racist than that. That's a physical suppression of A, the First Amendment, and B, she's trying to use physical evidence of what happened, to her. Well, Elizabeth Warren is explaining, and they silence her?
Yeah. So they silenced her. And me and Mark came to the understanding of what really does not end well.
Right.
And in history, if you know your history, you know that if you start out silencing,
you're going to have a revolt. You try to silence a group of people, and the more you try to control them, the more they will resist. Whether that be in China with the communists, where they tried to silence communists, they grew bigger. Whether that be in even with America in the South, you had these rebellions, these slave rebellions. They tried to suppress. These people rebel. People will not be controlled, and you should not control people.
Mm-hmm.
That's
the thing. As soon as we consider someone other, the first thing that happens is there's a experience of fear, and then it's like having somebody come in your house who you don't know and you don't really trust. The first thing you want to do is control them and make sure they stay in a certain section that keeps them away from certain things.
Right.
And it's like, as soon as that person becomes family in that house, then they're free to go wherever they want and do what they want, and they flourish. And there's so many different topics that can come up from this, because how can a young mind learn if they're looked at as a suspicious threat to be feared? And
that's one of the things that Trump kind of portrayed when he said, Chicago, he'd call in the National Guard to solve things in Chicago, that the feds.
He's going to call in the feds.
Maybe a better question to ask is, okay, why do we have crime in Chicago?
Yeah.
And I guarantee you 9 out of 10 times there's crime, and there's, whether that be theft or murders or drugs, there's crime because people can't have a good standard of living, like you're saying. If you're not able to get a good job, and you have to provide to your family, I don't want to say you're almost forced into crime, but, I'm a big hip-hop fan, but take a look at rapper Biggie Smalls. Did he really want to sell cocaine, or did he have to sell cocaine and crack because he had to provide for his daughter? Was it the environment that he lived in? What if he was being brought up in, right around Yale? Your environment plays such a big impact on the shaping of who you are. It's not to say that it defines you, but it plays a huge role in shaping who you are, that it becomes hard for people of color that grow up in these areas to make something of themselves, and it's not necessarily their fault. They have all their cards stacked against them.
So we talk about Coretta Scott King writing this letter about Jeff Sessions. And she's saying in the letter that Jeff Sessions is against voting rights. And this is the person that Trump chose. This is the person that's on his
cabinet.
On his cabinet. This is the person that he chose. And the wife of the greatest civil rights leader in America just 50 years ago, not too far back, we were talking about that if we were fighting for just regular basic standard of living rights,
there's generations
50 years ago
of people that could not vote a few decades back.
Not too far off.
That's not too far. Racism and slavery is older than America in itself. So when you have people who say that, racism is not a problem and Trump is not a racist, what we're trying to explain to you in a polite fashion is that racism is a bigger idea and concept than, oh, you're black, I don't like you, oh, you're this color, I don't like you, oh, you're Muslim, I don't like you. Racism is a system that oppresses. And this system has been oppressing black people historically
in America
for centuries. And even with the civil rights movement, are we really equal? Do blacks have the same standard of living that whites do? Are black? The fact that we have to have affirmative action to help out suggests that we're not equal. And I support affirmative action because it's a response to help people from communities that are not as better off as
others. Why are they not? Why are they not better? Well, we know that the ghettos were created to keep people of color in the same place because they were the people in the house who were not invited.
Hitler also had ghettos. Side point.
Yeah, so these are kind of things that don't end well. So
yes, that
we're gonna give you guys some pointers. Just It doesn't end well if you start out silencing a people, and it does not end well
if you try to generalize a group of people. That traditionally ends in genocide. If you try to label a group of people as a certain image, that happened with the Holocaust. They tried to label the Jews as these evil demonic people. Did not end well.
Does not end well. If you're building ghettos to keep all those people away from your neighborhood, doesn't end well. And many of the racial intensified moments in history have to do with pushing people into a particular corner. So what we're trying to do is, in love here, Methodists, hands in hands, we're going to hold hands. Yes, we're going to talk about these things, and we want you to chime in. We want you to post. We want you to write comments. We want you to share. But we want to talk about America. We want to talk about Trump. And we want to look at who he says he is. And then we want to actually look at what he is, what he's doing.
Actions speak louder than words. And, it's one thing for any historical figure to write their own biography. But even at that, you have to take their own words with a grain of salt. You have to analyze, did they really do this? Did they really say this? So that's important with history. If Trump says, he's reflective of people because he started off with a small loan of $1 million, can we take that as, oh, he's one of us? No. But, as Pastor Wendy was saying, is that our goal here is not to break people apart, it's to bring people together. And these are difficult conversations to have. And I'm a white person. And so don't be offended when we're saying these things. When black people are trying to talk about these topics, it's easy for white people to immediately think that it's their fault, and they're not talking about you particularly. They're talking about the system which they live in. Sorry.
Yeah.
And it's important to, as a Christian, as a moral person, it's important as a moral person to listen to your neighbor, to listen to everybody, regardless of who they are, what color skin they have, where they come from. The division nowadays is because we're so focused on being right and so afraid of being wrong. The division is caused because we don't want to look like bad guys, but when you listen to what's really going on, you admit there's a problem. You can see there is a problem here.
And it's okay.
And that's okay.
to say that.
We can address this problem together.
If we can admit that there is a problem.
There's a problem. So I kind of like to...
And that goes to the old racism and the new racism.
Right.
The old racism does not put the tensions together that are necessary for us to actually get to the bottom of the definition of racism.
Right.
There has to be an understanding of power, and there has to be an understanding of oppression and power, how those two are in tension with one another. How power and... Oh man, my notes. What was it? Hold on one second. How power... They're binary. They are binary. I looked at it this morning.
Power and oppression go together with
oppression.
Racism.
Go together with racism. That's the only way you can get to the bottom of racism, is if you can acknowledge that power and oppression are binary in the definition of racism. Now, many folks will want to have this argument and say, well, I don't see color, or this is too uncomfortable to even start.
We're all human. We are all human. I'm not saying that, but when you say a comment like "I don't see color," that's almost it.
That's a lie.
It's insulting.
It's insulting.
It's insulting too, because you can appreciate black culture and black people
and art and everything else.
And everything. A majority of American mediums that have been created are due to black people. They're due to rock and roll was created by black people. Blues was created by black people. Hip hop was created by black people. And it's okay to appreciate that. And what people tend to do, well, let me be more specific, what white people that are in the cave, and I'll explain that in 1 second.
Yeah.
What they tend to do is that they try to make things more about them than rather trying listening and understanding of what problem it is. Now, what I mean by in the cave, so Plato's allegory of the cave, or Socrates, what have you, there's this idea, there's this reality. And you have these people that are chained and they're up against a stone wall, and there's a fire behind them, and shadow puppets are put up behind the fire so they see these shadows in this cave. So they see that as a reality. To them, that's real. But you take one of them out, you bring him out of the cave, and you see the sunlight. So although that reality was real to them, was it the real reality? So when he comes out of the cave, he sees this real reality. That's what I talk about. There's a lot of white people nowadays that they see racism as, oh, that's kind of a thing of the past, that's their reality, but it's not the case. Once you come outside, once you listen, and once you understand, you see these things going on, you come to learn that there is this systematic oppression that is a real reality.
Mm-hmm. And it goes back to the beginning of time, bringing us to, I want to say probably our final topic,
right,
the Samaritan people
yes.
in the Bible. So if you look in the scriptures, you'll see different, if you just looked up all of the scriptures about the Samaritan people, and we see the scripture that talks about the Good Samaritan. Everybody knows the story about the Good Samaritan. But there was deep-rooted racism between the Jews and the Samaritans.
Yes.
And the Samaritans was a mixed people.
When Alexander the Great, he conquered all of the world, the known world at the time. There was culture, there's Hellenism, there's cultural diffusions, people mixed. Mm-hmm. And that resulted in some of this racism.
Yeah.
So you had Greeks and Jews kind of mixed, and you had this mixed populations, which were their Samaritans.
Mm-hmm. So Jesus is telling this parable of the Samaritan, and it's interesting because the priest went by and the Pharisees went by, and many of us don't want to identify ourselves as the priests or the Pharisees or the people who were too busy to help the guy on the ground. And Jesus was asking the question, are you really your brother's keeper? And can you see past the differences? Can you consider the guy on the ground just needs a helping hand? And the one who did go pick up the guy off the ground was the Good Samaritan. But if you look through the scriptures, you will find that the Jews and the Samaritans, the Jews they thought that the Samaritans were disgusting people.
They were the other.
They were the other. They were the people who were not worthy to
drink, to sit,
to drink from the same water fountain or whatever. That's who the Samaritans were to the Jews, and it goes all the way back throughout the history of the Bible. So it's interesting because Jesus is asking, will you be your brother's keeper? And the parable is just telling the story of a good Samaritan, and I even think that Jesus might have known. I think Jesus knew that while he was telling that story to the Jews, that they probably felt really uncomfortable. And that's a part of the conversation.
Yes.
That we're going to be uncomfortable. And that's okay.
But that's how you grow. That's how growth is.
Yeah.
Nothing in life worth fighting for is ever going to be easy. And you're going to have these bumps in the road, these uncomfortable situations. But that is what causes growth. That's what causes us to understand one another.
It causes us to see the sun, which is what Mark just said.
Yes.
Mark was just talking about us being folks being in the cave, and I even have my own little way of saying it's like the opt-out syndrome. I'm just not going to see it, especially if somebody's calling you from outside of the cave saying, hey, there's other things that you should see to know about your history, to know about theology. But the Samaritan, when he saw the guy on the ground, and I think that the reason why the Samaritan was able to go over and help that individual off the ground was because they knew what it felt like to be on the ground.
Yes.
And there's just one thing that I just want to point out to you. If you don't know what it's like to be hungry, or to live in a dangerous neighborhood, or to go to a terrible school where you have fear because of various horrible teachers, because of crime in the area. Trump would like to look at things and just say, let's just stop the crime, and that's a way to criminalize a whole people.
Yes.
And hurt people. So when you have a guy on the ground and he's hurting, and he really needs a helping hand, usually it's the one who actually has experienced some hurt that will go and help get that person off the ground, just in general. So I encourage you to take this conversation seriously, to chime in, to watch our blogs, keep an eye on what we're talking about, and let us know what you think also. And be willing to admit that we all make mistakes.
Yeah,
we can all be wrong.
it's-
Mark said that. Those were Mark's words.
Yep.
Mark said we have to be okay with being wrong.
And another just quick clarification. I'm not attacking, American history. Is that what I'm trying to do is, if you really love something, you can see its faults and you try to talk these things out and you try to make a difference, to help these problems. So I'm not criticizing anyone, but I'm merely commenting on what empirically we can see and what we can what conclusions we can draw from, the data that we see. And you can still love your country and be critical of it.
Yes.
You can still for anybody, every American citizen, every person in the world, you can still love America and be critical of it at the same time. There's a difference between our government and our people, and historically, our people have come together. Is there bumps in the roads? Absolutely, but historically, we've come together.
Is there room for improvement? Sure.
Yes.
Please say that statement that you said about.
Oh, right. There's this historian. I'll have to. He's slipping my mind, but he wrote a very great piece about how free and how, did the founding fathers really believe in what they were writing down in the Declaration of Independence? And Thomas Jefferson, for example, he says, he owned slaves and, he sexually assaulted some of these slaves. Can we still love America when the man who is writing, we hold these truths, undeniable that everyone is created, endowed, everybody has inalienable rights endowed by their creator of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Can we really, still appreciate a person who wrote that and totally contradict it? Well, you can criticize him. That's perfectly fine, but you could still believe in that very idea he wrote. You can believe and love and cherish the idea that every man and woman is created equal. Mm-hmm.
And every person that comes to this nation,
right,
in the hope of the dream of America, can believe that.
Yes, it's universal. It's a natural right. It's a right beyond human law. And you can love the idea and you could love that and, criticize some of our founding fathers. That's okay. You're American. You have the freedom of opinion. That's what we're kind of...
And it's okay to be wrong.
Yes, it's okay to be
wrong.
And
it's not going to kill us to have a conversation about it.
And let's not, like what we do, we try to stay polite. We don't yell. So, comment, please respond. But don't be Twitter trolls. Don't do what Trump does on Twitter.
Get involved with the conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.